Hello there. We are still on the opening rule number 2, develop with threats, and this time we go over the second game. It was played in Birmingham in 1858 between Paul Morphy as white and Lord George William Lyttleton as black. Lord Lyttleton was a distinguished member of the British Chess Association, and he was a very respected chess player of the time. So he was not just some petzer, but he participated in this blindfold simultaneous exhibition in which Morphy played several opponents blindfold, as in all the other games we've shown. And we'll see in this game also how this principle, develop with threats, is applied in practice. So let's get on to the game. Morphy starts with 1e4, so the usual Morphy style opening, just grabbing the center. Black responds with e5, most usual response in that time, and white now plays f4, so going for King's Gambit again, like in the previous game. Black captures this pawn, so it takes f4, and white plays knight f3, just developing. So let's stop here for a minute and see what does white want to accomplish with this opening. What is his plan here? So if he would not be opposed, if his opponent would allow him, white would like to do the following. He would like to play d4 to grab the center. He would like to, after he moves this pawn, he would like to grab this pawn on f4, thus developing the bishop. His other bishop would go to c4, thus aiming for this f7 square. His knight would be developed on c3. And in this setup, if you can imagine this, then the queen would go to d2, and after castles, white would be completely developed. So in this in this setup, which white is aiming for, okay, the crucial thing is this f4 pawn. So if this f4 pawn would be removed, white could continue his plan. And black understands this, and he wants to protect this f4 pawn with g5, and now white has to do some kind of plan B, because he cannot now develop his bishop, he cannot develop his queen on d2, and he has to think about something else. So white immediately challenges this g5 pawn with playing h4. And so this pawn is attacked, and if this pawn would be removed, then white could just proceed with his original intentions by bringing the bishop to f4. Notice that this pawn cannot be supported by another pawn in the black's camp. For example, if black would try to protect this with h6, then h takes g5, h takes g5, and black loses the rook. So this kind of defense doesn't work. Also, if black would try to support this with f6, then knight takes g5, f takes g5, now sacrificing a piece, but with a very strong attack with queen h5 check, and this attack is probably also losing this rook, because king has to move here, and then after check, queen can eventually fork king and the rook, or have some other attacking ideas. So instead of protecting this g5 pawn, black just pushes and plays g4, and now threat is he's attacking, of course, the knight. So knight has to move away, and it does on e5, and then black develops his another pawn with threat, so he plays d6, and now he's allowing for white to grab this g4 pawn, and he's in fact giving back this pawn for a threat, so in the next move. So knight captured on g4, and now black's idea is to play bishop e7, now threatening here you have this queen and bishop battery, and threatening to capture h4 with a check. So black gave away his g4 pawn for this idea. Morphy ignores this threat because he probably thought that it was not such a big threat, and he just played d4, now grabbing the center for himself. And black continued with his plan, so he took on h4 with check. White blocked the check by playing knight to f2, bishop took f2 check, and the king took back f2. So in this position black could be feeling satisfied with himself, because he manages to accomplish that white king cannot castle anymore, and he looks rather exposed in the middle of the board. But as a compensation, white has a very strong center, and white also have more active pieces from his side. So you see that all his pieces are actually very active, although they are on the first rank. So I would say that most of the masters would rather have white in this position than black. Okay, now black continues his development with knight f6, and also threatening to capture this e4 pawn with a check. So black is developing with a threat. White is also developing, and at the same time meeting the threat, so he's protecting his e4 pawn. But black likes this e4 pawn so much that he played queen to e7, now again threatening to capture this e4 pawn. And this is actually a very bad move. It not only violates several principles, but you will see later in the game that it allows for some forcing moves, like bishop b5, and which makes this move bad. But just based on the principles, look at for a moment black's pieces. So his pieces are completely undeveloped, and in this position, black had a chance to develop one of his pieces with a threat. So he could have played bishop g4, threatening queen, of course, and so he could develop with a threat, and then maybe afterwards develop his knight, and he would have a very playable position. But instead he just went greedy for the pawn and played this early queen move, developing the queen too early, as we will see in the next few moves. So white here allows this capture, and instead of protecting this pawn, Paul Morphy grabs this f4 pawn with his bishop, and thus developing his bishop. So he's trading his e pawn for opponent's f pawn, but with development. And also there is one saying of John Purdy, famous American chess teacher. He said that the best way to deal with a threat is to find some way to ignore it. So this is obviously the threat here, and instead of trying to protect this pawn to answer this threat, Morphy just ignores the threat and instead grabs a pawn on f4. Okay, so black continues. He just takes the pawn on e4, knight captures back, and now queen captures e4. And now let's take a moment to look at this position. So on the first glance, optically, this looks dangerous for white, because the white king is exposed and the black queen is very close to white king. So this looks like white should be in trouble. But once you look at the concrete moves, concrete opportunities in this position, then you will see that white is actually much better here, because white has several forcing moves in his sleeve, and this queen is not really a threat to this king, although it is very close. So white plays this forcing move, bishop b5 check. And now what are the alternatives? Well, first of all, this check cannot be blocked, for example, by playing c6, because rook e1 would just win the queen by pin. So what are the other alternatives? If king could go to d8, Then bishop g5 check also wins the queen, because queen has to block this check. This is the only legal move here, and then bishop just captures the queen. So so this doesn't work, and the only thing black can do is to play king f8. But now white has another forcing move, so he can deliver check, bishop h6 check, and king of course has to go to g8. And now if you look at this position, again the queen is very close to the king, but I would say it's so close and yet so far, because it cannot deliver any checks to the king. So what are the possible squares for delivering check? For example, f4, but this is covered by the bishop. Then h4 would be check, but this is covered by the rook. This pawn is protected by the queen. This pawn also is protecting by the queen. So although this queen is very close to the king, actually black has no threats available. He cannot give check, he cannot threat to capture any pieces, and this is just a very passive position for black. So Morphy plays another move with a threat. This is rook to h5, now threatening just checkmate on g5. Black has to do something about this, so he plays his bishop on f5, and now he can block this check on g5. And in this position, Morphy again develops with a threat. He plays queen d2, so now he's developing his queen, and also he's releasing his rook, his only inactive piece in the position. What is the threat here? The threat, of course, is to play queen to g5 check, and after bishop blocks with bishop to g6, then queen could go to d8 with check and mate in the next move. So this is another example of developing with a threat. Black plays bishop to g6, trying to meet this threat, but now, as I mentioned, this rook is this rook on a1 is released, so Morphy just played rook e1. And now he threatens, he is making a double threat, so he threatens to capture the queen, and if queen moves, then white could just deliver checkmate on e8. And in this point, move 17, black just resigned. And let's just look at this final position. So Morphy managed to develop all his pieces with either forcing moves or a threat. So if you remember the game, this was delivered with check, this bishop was delivered with check, this rook was developed with mating threat, and this queen was also developed with mating threat. So you can see that all the Morphy's pieces are developed by means of threats and forcing moves. And of course, as in the most of Morphy's games, all his pieces join the attack. So if you look all these 5 pieces, every piece is active, every piece is developed, and every piece has its role in the attack. On the other hand, if you look at black's camp, so this rook is doing nothing, this knight is doing nothing, and this rook is doing nothing. So Morphy plays with 5 pieces, and black defends with only 2 pieces. So in that light, it's not a surprise that game ended very soon and very efficient. So following my own advice, you should go through any master game twice. So I will go once more through this game, this time quicker, and hopefully by this repetition we'll be able to memorize and remember the things we have learned from this game. Okay, so let's go quickly through the game. Morphy opens with e4, black responds e5, Morphy is going for King's Gambit. King's Gambit is accepted, and Morphy develops his knight to f3. Wanting to keep this pawn on f4 and thus to obstruct the development of white pieces, black plays g5. Morphy responds by playing h4, now challenging this g5 pawn in order to be able to capture f4 in the future. There is no efficient way to protect a g5 pawn, so black plays g4, threatening the knight. The knight has to move away, and black plays d6, again chasing away the knight and allowing for this capture on g4 in order to deliver next threat. So knight captures on g4, and now black plays bishop to e7, threatening to capture h4 with check. Morphy ignores this and instead grabs the center with d4. And now black continues with his plan, so he captures on h4 with check. Morphy blocks the check with knight f2, bishop captures f2, king captures f2. And now white cannot castle anymore, but for compensation, white has strong center, and his pieces are more active than black's. Black develops with another threat, so now he plays knight f6, threatening to capture the pawn on e4. Morphy responds by playing knight c3, protecting the e4 pawn, and the white plays queen to e7, again threatening to win this pawn. And now Morphy doesn't care anymore. He lets black has his pawn and plays bishop takes f4 instead, developing with capture of the pawn. Black captures the pawn as he was planning to. Morphy recaptures, and black plays queen takes e4. And now it looks like that the queen is very close to the white's exposed king, but not really, because white has many forcing moves in his sleeve, and the queen cannot make any actual threat here. So Morphy develops his bishop with a forcing move, bishop b5 check. Black cannot block, nor can he move on d8, because in both cases he will lose his queen. So he has to play king to f8. Morphy now plays bishop to h6 check, and now this threat of queen coming to f4 is eliminated, and queen cannot do anything here actually. So king has to move to g8, and Morphy brings his rook into attack with another threat. So now the threat is g5 with check and checkmate. Black responds by playing bishop to f5, now planning to block this check with bishop to g6. And now Morphy develops his queen with another threat. So again, the threat is to deliver check on g5, and then afterwards check on d8 with the mate in the next move. So to answer this threat, black plays bishop g6, but now since this queen moved, this rook is also active, and rook moves to e1, threatening either to capture the queen or to deliver checkmate on e8. And it was in this point that black resigned the game. Okay, so this is it for game 2 of this principle. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you like the video, please click the like button. You can subscribe to my channel, check out my other videos, check out the video description box below. You'll find some useful links and references, and please be free to leave your comment, share your experience, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.